The shop window creaks like a breaking bone. In the covered market, the man in the worn coat places an antique watch, his last inheritance, on the dirty cloth. The street vendor counts 2 coins and hands them over without surprise. Across the street, inside a dark car, the executive watches through the fogged window. His breath is caught, his jaw tense. He doesn't know it yet, but those 2 coins have just bought the truth that would change everything. Before we dive into this story, leave your comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us which city you're joining us from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. The first sound is always the creaking of the shop window, its glass giving way slowly, as if it doesn't want to open, as if it knows that on the other side there is only need and haste. In the city's covered market in Manchester, where the smell of spices mingles with the sweat of those who have been working since dawn, Joel adjusts his worn coat and looks at his own hands. They tremble, not from cold, though winter is approaching, but from something he cannot name. His hands tremble because they know what they are about to do. He takes a small bundle, made of kitchen cloth, from the inside pocket of his coat. Slowly, like someone undoing a prayer, he opens the fabric and reveals an antique pocket watch. The golden metal, though scratched by time, still reflects the yellowish light of the market lamps. The white dial has black Roman numerals, and the hands, thin as needles, point to 3:15 in the afternoon. Joel doesn't look at the time. For a long time, hours haven't mattered to him. He places the watch on the makeshift counter, a wooden plank supported by 2 crates, and waits. Around him, the market buzzes with life, women haggling over the price of tomatoes, children running between stalls, men carrying sacks of flour on their shoulders. But there, in that small space where Joel waits, time seems to have stopped. The street vendor approaches. His name is Mark, and his fingers are always stained with grease because he repairs bicycles in his spare time. He looks at the watch without touching it, like someone examining a wound. "How much do you want for it?" he asks, but his voice holds no curiosity. It holds weariness. Joel lowers his eyes. 2 coins. 2 coins? Mark frowns. "That's worth much more than 2 coins, Mr. Joel." "I know." Joel's voice comes out hoarse. "But it's all I need." Mark doesn't ask why. In the market, no one asks why. He takes 2 coins from his pocket, small, worn, almost without shine, and places them on the plank. The sound they make hitting the wood is dry, definitive. Joel closes his eyes for an instant before pushing the watch towards Mark's side. It's as if he's handing over a secret, or a piece of himself. Across the street, parked in the lot in front of the market, there is a black car with tinted windows. Inside, a man in a suit observes the entire scene. His hands grip the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turn white. His breath is caught in his throat. His name is Richard Maxwell, president of one of Manchester's largest construction companies, and Joel is his father. Richard doesn't get out of the car. He can't get out. He can't bring himself to get out. Because if he gets out, he'll have to admit that he saw his father selling for 2 miserable coins, the watch that he, Richard, transformed into the symbol of his entire business history. The watch that appears in photos of his speeches, the watch he uses to talk about tradition, about heritage, about family continuity, the watch that, according to his official version, passed from father to son for 3 generations. Mark puts the watch in the inside pocket of his coat and walks away unhurriedly. Joel picks up the 2 coins, feels their unreal weight in his palm, and walks in the opposite direction. He doesn't look back. He doesn't look at the black car. He knows his son is there, but he also knows it's not time for them to talk yet. Not yet. Richard remains in the car for another 10 minutes, watching his father walk away among the market stalls until he disappears into the crowd. Then, with an abrupt movement, he opens the glove compartment and takes out a thick envelope full of money. He gets out of the car and walks directly to Mark. "I'll buy the watch back," he says, without greeting. Mark examines him from head to toe. The expensive suit, the shoes that cost more than many people's salaries, the smell of imported cologne. "It's not for sale," he replies simply. "Everything is for sale." Richard opens the envelope. "How much do you want?" "It's not a matter of price." Mark takes a crumpled paper from his pocket. "Your father gave me this." Richard takes the paper and reads. The handwriting is shaky but firm. "Please do not sell this watch to my son, no matter how much he offers. When the time comes, I will tell him where to find it myself. Joel." Richard's hands tremble as he holds the paper. For the first time in his life, money doesn't solve it. For the first time in his life, there's something he cannot buy. And for the first time in his life, he wonders why his father did this. The click of the glove compartment, when Richard closes it back, carries a silent humiliation that Edmund, his driver, pretends not to notice. During the ride back to the mansion, neither of them speaks. The silence inside the car is dense like a summer rain. That night, in the mansion Richard built in the most exclusive district of Manchester, there is a different kind of silence. It's a silence of thick carpets and doors that don't slam shut, a silence of expensive crystals and paintings that cost fortunes, a silence that echoes. Richard walks through the corridors like someone carrying a sentence he doesn't yet know. He finds his father in the living room, sitting in the leather armchair that belonged to his grandfather, the only antique piece Richard kept in the decor. Joel is reading an old book with a worn cover. He doesn't even look up when his son enters. "Why did you sell the watch?" The question comes out harsher than Richard intended. Joel slowly closes the book and finally looks at his son. His eyes are serene, but there is something in them that Richard cannot decipher. "Out of necessity," he replies. "Necessity for what? Money? You know you can ask for anything." "Necessity for lightness," Joel interrupts softly. "Not money. Lightness." Richard feels his voice rise. "Father, that watch is our history. It's our tradition. I built entire speeches around it." Joel smiles, but it's a joyless smile. "You built speeches," he repeats, "about a watch. Don't you understand? In company meetings, when I talk about continuity, about family values, about tradition, that watch is our symbol." Symbol. Joel smiles again. Interesting choice of word. Richard gets up from the armchair, beginning to pace back and forth. On the walls, family portraits seem to watch him. Photos of graduations, weddings, business successes, all of them with him wearing the pocket watch. "Father, you don't understand. That watch represents everything we've built. It represents our lineage, our—" "Richard," Joel's voice cuts the air like a sharp blade. "Sit down." There is something in the tone that makes Richard stop immediately. He sits down, feeling for the first time in years like a child before his father. Joel leans forward, his hands clasped over his knees. "That watch never belonged to the pompous lineage you proclaim." Richard's world stops. "What do you mean?" "The watch." Joel takes a deep breath, like someone preparing to unravel a decades-old misunderstanding. "The watch came from a humble hand. It was a gift a teacher gave to your mother on a rainy day when everything seemed about to collapse." Richard feels something crack in his chest. It's not anger. It's something worse. It's the belated recognition that he built a lie upon a lie. "What teacher?" "Mr. Edward, a teacher at the public school where your mother taught. She was pregnant with you. I'd just lost my factory job, and we didn't even have money for rent." Joel looks at his own hands. "Mr. Edward noticed our situation, and in a gesture of charity that your mother almost refused, gave her the watch. He said it was to ensure that you both always knew the right time to start over." The silence that follows is deafening. Why did you never tell me this? Because you never asked. Joel slowly stands up. You created your own version of the story, son, and I let you. Richard stumbles on the Persian rug as he stands, as if the floor had moved beneath his feet. But then, all those times I spoke about family tradition. You were talking about an act of charity a teacher did for a desperate family. Joel walks to the window. There's nothing wrong with that, Richard. The problem is, you turned charity into nobility, humility into pride. Richard falls back into the armchair. For the first time in decades, he is speechless. And for the first time in his life, he understands that the 2 coins Joel received for the watch were not a price. They were a message. Night fell heavy over the mansion, bringing with it a cold that didn't come from the weather, but from within the walls. Richard couldn't sleep. He lay on the king-size bed, staring at the ceiling decorated with plaster, moldings, thinking about all the times he had told the story of the watch. How many people had heard his version? How many businessmen, employees, journalists? How many times had he said the watch represented 3 generations of business tradition? How many times had he lied without knowing he was lying? Or did he know? At 5 in the morning, he gave up trying to sleep. He went down to the office and turned on the computer. He wanted to send an email to Mark, offering more money for the watch. But the words wouldn't come. How to explain the urgency without explaining the humiliation? Soft knocks on the door interrupted him. It was Helen, the housekeeper who had worked in the house for 15 years. "Sorry to disturb you, Mr. Maxwell," she said, entering with a coffee tray. "I noticed the office light was on." "Thank you, Helen." Richard accepted the cup but didn't drink. "Tell me something. Do you know stories about my father? About my family?" Helen hesitated. After 15 years in the house, she knew when to tread on dangerous ground. "What would you like to know, sir?" "The truth." Richard looked directly at her. "Helen, I'm tired of versions. I want the truth." She placed the tray on the table and sat in the chair opposite his, something she had never done before. "Your father is a good man. Mr. Maxwell always has been. That's not what I asked." "No, but it's what you need to hear first." Helen clasped her hands in her lap. "There are things he never told you, things he did to protect you." "What things?" Helen took a deep breath. "Do you remember when you were starting out in life? When you rented that first office space to set up your firm?" Richard nodded. How could he forget? It was the first step to building his empire. "Do you remember how you got the money?" "I took out a bank loan." "No, sir. You pawned the watch." Helen's words hit Richard like a punch to the stomach. "How do you know that?" "Because the next day, when you thought you had lost the watch forever, your father went to the pawn shop and redeemed it. He paid with all the money he had in his wallet and a little more he borrowed from a neighbor." Richard feels the world spin around him. "That's not possible." "He asked me never to tell. He said you already felt bad enough for having pawned a family heirloom. He didn't want you to feel even worse, knowing that your father had to sacrifice his savings to fix it. But then, when I got the watch back, your father put it back where you always left it. You never knew it had been redeemed." Richard remembers that day, the feeling of relief when he found the watch in the drawer, the gratitude he felt, thinking fate had conspired in his favor, the promise he made to himself never to part with the object again. He never imagined that fate had a name, a surname, and lived in the same house as him. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I think it's time for you to understand why your father sold the watch for 2 coins. Helen stood up. "It wasn't out of financial need, sir. It was to force you to remember who you truly are beneath all this wealth." She left the office, leaving Richard alone with his memories and his guilt. The phone rings at 7 in the morning. It's Michael, his partner at the construction company. "Richard, have you seen the news? There's an article about our company in the paper. They're talking about next week's charity event." Richard doesn't even remember the event. His head is elsewhere. "What event?" The launch of the charity fund. You suggested it yourself, remember? You said you were going to talk about family tradition, about the watch. The watch. Always back to the watch. Michael, I need to cancel my participation. Cancel. Richard, you're the keynote speaker. The story of the watch is the highlight of the presentation. Richard closes his eyes. The story of the watch, his invented story about an object that wasn't even his by right, but by charity. I'll explain later, he says, and hangs up. 2 hours later, Richard is in the car, driving aimlessly through the streets of Manchester. Edmund offered to drive, but Richard needed to feel control over something, even if it was just the steering wheel. Without consciously realizing it, he drives to the Elmwood neighborhood where he grew up. The house where he spent his childhood and adolescence is small and simple, squeezed between other small and simple houses. The paint on the walls is peeling, and the windows whistle when the wind blows. Joel is on the porch, sitting in an old rocking chair, reading the same book from the night before. He wears a coat too thin for the morning cold. Richard stops the car in front of the house and stays there, watching his father through the windshield. Suddenly, he feels a vivid memory, himself at 8 years old, sitting on those porch steps, listening to Joel read stories to him. Simple stories from books borrowed from the public library. When had he stopped listening? Joel looks up from his book and sees his son in the car. He doesn't wave, doesn't smile. He just waits. Richard gets out of the car and walks to the porch. The concrete steps creak under his feet, exactly as they creaked when he was a child. May I sit? Joel closes the book and points to another chair. You always can. They sit in silence for a few minutes. Richard looks at the street where he grew up. Simple houses, children playing on the sidewalk, women hanging laundry in the yard. A world he had left behind without looking back. Why didn't you tell me about the pawn? Joel sighs. Because you were building who you wanted to be. I didn't have the right to destroy that. But you had the right to let me lie. You weren't lying, Richard. You were believing the version of the truth you needed to believe to move forward. Richard looks at his own hands. Soft hands that never held a tool, that never felt the weight of manual labor. And now? How am I going to move forward, knowing I built everything on a lie? You didn't build on a lie, Joel leans forward. You built on an act of love. The problem is you turned love into a myth. I don't understand the difference. Love is simple. It's a teacher giving a watch to a family in need. It's a father secretly redeeming an object his son pawned. It's someone caring enough not to let you suffer. Joel pauses. Myth is complicated. It's turning these simple things into grand narratives about nobility and tradition that never existed. Richard feels tears burning in his eyes. How do I fix it? First, you need to decide what you want to fix. The myth or the truth? What's the difference? If you want to fix the myth, you go after Mark and offer a fortune for the watch. You'll invent a new story to explain why I sold it. You'll continue living in the version you created. And if I want to fix the truth? Joel smiles for the first time since the conversation began. Then you stop trying to buy the watch back and start to understand why I sold it. They fall silent again. The wind rustles the trees on the street and some leaves fall onto the porch. Father, Richard finally says, tell me the real story, all of it, from the beginning. Joel opens the book he was reading and takes out an old photo that was being used as a bookmark. The photo shows a young woman, pregnant, next to a thin man wearing simple clothes. They are in front of a public school. That's your mother 3 months before you were born. Richard takes the photo. He had never seen that image before. Why did you never show me? Because you never asked about the beginning, son. You always wanted to know about the middle and the end. About success and growth, never about the days when we weren't sure you would have enough to eat. And then Joel begins to tell the real story. Without myths, without pompous narratives, just the raw, simple truth about a young couple, in love and desperately poor, trying to raise a child in a world that had no room for dreams. Richard listens to every word, feeling something inside him break and rebuild at the same time. When Joel finishes, The sun is already high in the sky. And now, Richard asks, now you decide what story you want to tell from now on. Our story? Your story, son. Mine is already told. Richard gets up, kisses his father's forehead, and walks back to the car. But before getting in, he turns one last time. Father, where is the watch now? Joel smiles. In the right place? What place is that? Waiting for you to discover who you truly are. When you do, you'll know where to find it. Richard drives back home with a heavy heart, but lighter at the same time. For the first time in years, he doesn't know what he's going to do next. And for the first time in years, that uncertainty doesn't scare him. It liberates him. The event was scheduled for Thursday evening in the grand ballroom of Manchester's most luxurious hotel. 200 people from the local elite confirmed their presence. The menu was approved, the flowers chosen, the pianist hired. Everything planned around a speech that Richard no longer knew how to give. He is in the mansion's office, surrounded by crumpled drafts. All versions of the speech begin the same way. The watch I bring today represents 3 generations of tradition, and all end in the same place. A lie he can no longer sustain. Michael calls for the 5th time that morning. Richard, I need the final version of your speech for the press officer. I'm still working on it. Working. The event is tomorrow. What's there to work on? It's the same story you've been telling for years. Perhaps that's the problem. Silence on the other end of the line. What do you mean? Michael, what if I tell a different story? Different how? Richard looks out the window. In the garden, the gardener is carefully pruning the rose bushes, examining each branch before cutting it. The truth. The truth? Richard, you all right? The watch story is perfect. It speaks of tradition, family values, continuity. It's exactly what investors want to hear. But it's not true. True? Michael laughs. Richard, marketing isn't about truth. It's about the story that resonates best with the audience. Richard hangs up without saying goodbye. Helen knocks on the door 2 hours later, bringing lunch on a tray. You didn't come down to eat. I'm not hungry. She places the tray on the table and notices the crumpled papers scattered on the floor. Problems with the speech? Helen, may I ask you something? You know my family's real story. What do you think I should say tomorrow? Helen sits in the chair opposite the table. It depends on what you want to achieve with the speech. What do you mean? If you want to impress people, tell the old version. If you want to inspire them, tell the truth. What's the difference? Impressing is easy. Everyone wants to believe in stories of noble families and grand traditions. It makes people feel part of something bigger. Helen pauses. Inspiring is harder. It means showing that extraordinary things can be born from ordinary situations, that love is worth more than lineage. Richard picks up one of the crumpled papers from the floor and smooths it on the table. What if I tell the truth and people are disappointed? Then you'll find out who's really worth having around. That afternoon, Richard does something he hadn't done in years. He goes for a walk alone in the city. He leaves the mansion without telling Edmund, gets in the car and drives to the city center. He parks on a random street and starts walking aimlessly. People pass him without recognizing him, without the expensive suit, without the official car, without his usual imposing posture. He is just another man walking on the sidewalks. The freedom of this anonymity is strange and comfortable at the same time. He stops in front of a public school. It's dismissal time, and children run across the playground towards their parents waiting at the gate. A girl trips and drops her books. A boy stops to help her pick them up. There's nothing extraordinary about the scene, but Richard watches, fascinated by the simplicity of the gesture. Beautiful, isn't it? Richard turns around. Beside him is an elderly man with white hair and simple clothes. Excuse me? The generosity of children. They haven't yet learned to calculate what they'll gain by helping others. Richard observes the man more closely. There's something familiar about his face. Do you know me? The man smiles. I am Edward, Mr. Edward. The ground seems to move beneath Richard's feet. The teacher? The very same. Edward extends his hand. It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Richard. Your mother spoke highly of you. Richard shakes the man's hand with reverence. The watch. Ah, yes, the watch. Edward looks at the children in the playground. Your mother told me it would be for you two to always know the right time to start over. It seems to have worked. Worked? You started over many times, didn't you? You rose from poverty, built a company, created jobs. Isn't that starting over? Richard feels his throat tighten. But I turned everything into a lie. I made the watch a symbol of nobility we never had. Edward laughs gently. You turned a gesture of charity into a success story. What's wrong with that? The problem is it's not true. Richard, Edward places his hand on his shoulder. Truth isn't about the facts. Truth is about what the facts mean. Chatterley. I don't understand. The fact is I gave a watch to a family in need. But the meaning is that sometimes a small gesture of charity can change the course of entire generations. Edward smiles. You are living proof that that watch fulfilled its purpose. Ah, but the stories I told about family tradition. Do you think tradition can only be about nobility? That family is only valuable if it has a coat of arms. Edward shakes his head. Your family's true tradition is the ability to start over when all seems lost. Your father did that, your mother did that, you did that, and that's worth much more than any pompous lineage. Richard feels tears burning in his eyes. Then why did my father sell the watch? Because you forgot that. You forgot that your strength doesn't come from where you came from, but from where you managed to get to. Edward looks at the sky, which is beginning to darken. Your father sold the watch to remind you that the value of things isn't in what they represent, but in what they awaken in people. And what does the watch awaken? Hope for people. Like your mother and father were, the watch represented the possibility that tomorrow could be better than today. For people like you have become, it represents the responsibility to make tomorrow better for others. Edward bids farewell with a wave and walks away slowly. Richard stands there for a long time, watching the children return home with their parents. When he gets home, it's already night. Helen waits for him in the living room. Your father called, asked if you'd like to have dinner with him tomorrow after the event. Did he say where? At the old house. Said he's going to cook. Richard smiles for the first time in days. Tell him I accept. That night, Richard writes a completely new speech. He doesn't talk about pompous tradition or noble lineages. He talks about a teacher who gave a watch to a desperate family. He talks about a father who sacrificed his savings to correct his son's mistake without the son knowing. He talks about the difference between apparent value and real value. And he talks about the responsibility we all have to be the gesture of charity in someone's life. When he finishes, it's 3 a.m. The speech is 2 pages long. It's the shortest he has ever written, and it's the truest. He rereads it once, folds the paper, and puts it in the pocket of the jacket he will wear to the event. For the first time in weeks, Richard sleeps soundly, and he doesn't dream of watches. The hotel ballroom was perfect. Golden lights bathed the round tables, covered with white linen cloths. Arrangements of white and gold flowers decorated each table. The pianist played soft melodies while waiters circulated, offering champagne and canapes. 200 people from the city's elite chatted in small groups, creating a civilized murmur that echoed through the room. Businessmen, politicians, doctors, lawyers, all the important people were there, and everyone expected to hear Richard Maxwell's famous watch story. Richard was in the speaker's dressing room, adjusting his tie for the 5th time. His hands trembled slightly. In his jacket pocket, he felt the weight of the speech he had written in the early hours of the morning. Michael entered the dressing room like a hurricane. "Richard, thank goodness you're here. The press is here. 3 TV channels, 2 newspapers. It's going to be incredible coverage." Michael. "And there's more." The governor confirmed his presence. He arrived 10 minutes ago. He's eager to hear the watch story. He commented that it could be a good theme for next year's campaign. "Michael, I need to tell you something." Michael stopped talking and looked at his partner. There was something different in Richard's voice. "What is it?" "I changed the speech." Changed how?" Richard took the paper from his pocket. "I'm going to tell the truth." "The truth?" "Richard, you're nervous, that's normal, but the story you always tell is perfect. Don't change anything now." "I can't tell that story anymore." Why not?" Richard took a deep breath. "Because it's not true." Michael's face darkened. "It's not true." "Of course it is. The watch has been in your family for 3 generations. "No. The watch was a gift of charity that a teacher gave to learn. My pregnant mother when my parents didn't even have money for rent." The silence that followed was deafening. "You're kidding." "I'm not." "Richard, there are 200 people out there. There's the press, there's the governor." "I know. You can't go out there and say your family was poor." "Why not?" Because... Michael gesticulated, unable to form sentences. "Because it will destroy your credibility. It will destroy our image." "Our image is a lie, Michael." "A lie? What lie? You built an empire. You created hundreds of jobs. You are one of the most respected businessmen in Manchester, based on a story that isn't true." Michael sat in a chair, running his hands through his hair. "Richard, for God's sake, think about it. If you say your family was poor, that the watch was charity, you'll become a joke. People will lose respect for you." "The right people won't." "The right people? Richard, these people out there are our clients. They are our investors. They are the ones who keep our company running." Richard looked at himself in the mirror. He saw a 50-year-old man, graying hair, a face marked by time and responsibility. And for the first time in years, he liked what he saw. "Michael, I'm going to ask you a question. Would you rather be rich by lying or true by being who you are?" "That's a stupid question." "Is it?" Michael got up and went to the door. "I can't let you do this. I'm going to cancel your speech." "You can't." "Yes, I can. I'm your partner. And I'm the company president." Richard turned to face Michael. "And I'm going up on that stage and telling the truth." Michael opened the door forcefully. "Then you'll go up alone, because I'm not staying here to watch you destroy everything we've built." He left, slamming the door. Richard was left alone in the dressing room. His hands stopped trembling. For the first time that evening, he felt calm. 10 minutes later, someone knocked on the door. It was Helen. "Mr. Maxwell, it's time." "Helen, what are you doing here?" "Your father asked me to come. He said you might need a friendly face before going on stage." Richard smiled. "Did he always know what I was going to do?" "I think he hoped." "And you? What do you think?" Helen approached and adjusted his tie. "I think it's time for the boy I watched grow up to meet the man he became." Richard kissed her forehead. "Thank you." "For what?" "For reminding me who I am." They left the dressing room together. In the corridor leading to the ballroom, Richard could hear the murmur of the crowd. 200 people waiting to hear a lie he had told 1,000 times. But today, they would hear the truth. The master of ceremonies announced his entrance. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the president of Maxwell Construction, Richard Maxwell." The ballroom erupted in applause. Richard walked onto the small stage, greeted the audience with a nod, and positioned himself behind the microphone. He looked at the audience. He saw familiar faces, clients, suppliers, employees, competitors. He saw the governor in the front row, smiling and applauding. He saw journalists with notebooks, television cameras focusing on his face. And at the key dish back of the hall near the entrance, he saw something that made him swallow hard. His father was there. Joel stood by the door, wearing the same worn coat as always, and beside him was Mark, the street vendor from the market. Mark carried in the inside pocket of his coat a bulk that Richard immediately recognized. The watch. Richard felt his throat tighten. Helen tried to approach his father and the vendor, but Joel raised his hand with the dignity of someone who no longer argues with closed doors. The applause subsided. The ballroom fell silent, waiting. Richard took the paper from his pocket, unfolded it on the lectern, and began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. You came here expecting to hear a story. The story of a watch that, as you must have read in the press, represents 3 generations of business tradition in my family." The audience nodded, anticipating the familiar narrative. "But today, I want to tell a different story. I want to tell the truth." A murmur ran through the hall. "The watch you heard about is not a family heirloom. It did not pass from father to son for generations. It represents no business tradition whatsoever." The murmur grew. Some people exchanged confused glances. The watch was a gift that a public school teacher gave to my mother over 50 years ago when she was pregnant with me and my parents didn't even have money to pay the rent. The silence was now total. My father had lost his job. My mother, who was a teacher, earned very little. They were young, in love, and desperately poor. One day at the school where my mother worked, it rained heavily. She was soaked, pregnant, tired. Mr. Edward, a fellow teacher, noticed the family's situation and, in a gesture of Christian charity, gave her this watch. He said it was to ensure that she and the baby always knew the right time to start over. The governor frowned. Some businessmen whispered among themselves. Richard continued, "For years, I built a pompous narrative around this object. I spoke of lineage, of tradition, of aristocratic family values that never existed. I lied to you, and worse, I lied to myself." An employee at the back of the room gave 2 timid claps, which were lost in the general silence. "But a week ago, my father sold the watch. He sold it for 2 coins in a popular market, and when I asked him why, he gave me the hardest answer I've ever heard in my life. He said he sold it to measure what cannot be measured. The weight of stories when they are torn from those who lived them and turned into a display." Richard looked directly at his father. "My father sold the watch to teach me the difference between apparent value and real value. To remind me that our family's true tradition is not the nobility we never had, but the ability to start over when all seems lost." The company's board member leaned in to whisper in the ear of an investor who was visibly becoming uncomfortable. "And there's more. Years ago, when I was starting my career, I pawned this same watch to get money to rent my first office. The next day, I thought I had lost it forever. But I discovered last week that my father secretly went to the pawn shop and redeemed it. He paid with all the money he had and a little more he borrowed. He did this so I wouldn't know I had lost my family heirloom." Tears began to stream down Richard's face. "My father protected my pride at his own expense, and I, in return, turned this gesture of love into corporate merchandising." The hall was icy. Some guests looked towards the exits. "Ladies and gentlemen, you came here to hear about a charity fund, and I will talk about it, but not in the way you expected. This fund will not exist to clear our conscience or improve our image. It will exist to honor people like Mr. Edward, who give watches to needy pregnant women. To honor people like my father who sacrifice everything in silence to protect their children. Richard took a deep breath. And it will exist to remind us that true value is not in what we have, but in what we do with what we have. He folded the paper and put it back in his pocket. Thank you. The silence that followed was deafening. No one applauded. Some people stood up and walked towards the exit. The governor looked at his aides with an expression that mixed surprise and irritation. But at the back of the hall, near the door, Joel smiled, and Mark took the watch from his pocket. The ballroom emptied quickly. In a matter of minutes, 200 people became 50, then 20, then 10. The governor was one of the first to leave, followed by his entourage of aides, who whispered urgently among themselves. The journalists put away their notebooks with expressions of not quite knowing what story to tell. Richard remained on stage, watching his audience disperse like smoke. Michael walked past him without looking, striding quickly towards the exit. Some company employees greeted him with embarrassed smiles before leaving. But not everyone left. Helen stayed. Some older employees stayed. The pianist curiously stayed and even began to play a soft melody as if to fill the void left by the silence. And at the back of the hall, Joel and Mark slowly approached. Richard descended from the stage, eager to reach them, but was intercepted by some people who wanted to greet him. An elderly lady who worked for a local charity organization shook his hand firmly. "Thank you for your courage," she said simply. A young company employee approached. "Mr. Maxwell, may I say something? My father also came from poverty. I never had the courage to tell anyone here at the company. Thank you for showing me that there's nothing wrong with that." A doctor who ran a philanthropic hospital touched his arm. "Your real story is much more inspiring than the old version. When the charity fund starts, count me in." Gradually, Richard realized that the people who stayed were different from those who left. They were people who understood the difference between impressing and inspiring. When he finally reached his father and Mark, the hall was almost empty. "Father," Joel hugged him. "I'm proud of you." "Proud? I just destroyed my reputation." "Do you just built your character?" Mark approached, taking the watch from his pocket. "I think this belongs to you." Richard looked at the object. For the first time, he saw that its beauty did not come from the shine of the metal, but from the scratches that time had left on it. "Why are you giving it back to me?" "Because your father asked me to keep it until you were ready to hear him without a microphone, without an audience, without grand words." Mark smiled. "I think you are now." Richard took the watch carefully. He felt its familiar weight in his hand, but now that weight had a different meaning. "May I ask a question?" Richard looked at his father. "How did you know I was going to tell the truth?" "I didn't know. I hoped." "What if I hadn't told?" "Then you would forever be wondering why I sold the watch for 2 coins." Richard laughed for the first time that night. "And now, what do I do with it?" Joel pointed to the dial. "First, set the time." "To what time?" "To the time that made a difference in your life." Richard thought for a moment, then began to slowly turn the crown. The metal creaked slightly, a sound he had never noticed before, but which now sounded like music to him. He adjusted the hands to mark 10:30 at night. "What time is that?" asked Mark. "The time my father entered the pawn shop to redeem the watch I had lost." Joel smiled. "Good choice." The sound of the click when Richard closed the watch cover echoed through the almost empty hall. It was a soft, definitive sound, a forgiveness that didn't need to be spoken. The 3 men left the hotel together. Outside, the night was cold, but the sky was clear, full of stars. "Father, may I ask one more thing?" "Always." "What will happen now? With the company, with the business?" I don't know, but I know it will happen based on truth, not a lie. And that's already halfway there. Mark said goodbye with a handshake and walked away. Richard and Joel stood there on the sidewalk for a moment, watching the city's movement. Father, that dinner you invited me to. It's still on. Can I go now? Joel smiled. I was waiting for you to ask. They went to the old house, the house where Richard grew up. During the journey, they talked about simple things, the weather, the city, the changes in the neighborhood. They didn't talk about the event, about the consequences, about the uncertain future. At the house, Joel cooked pasta with tomato sauce, the same dish he made when Richard was a child, and they didn't have money for more elaborate ingredients. They ate at the kitchen table, the same scratched formica table where Richard had done homework for years. Father, can I see more old photos? Joel brought a shoebox full of photographs. They spent hours looking at images of a simple life. Christmas with cheap gifts, birthdays with homemade cakes, Sundays at the public park. In all the photos, Richard saw something he had forgotten: genuine happiness. Why did I stop coming here? Because you thought it was too small for who you had become. And was it? No, but you needed to discover that for yourself. When Richard left, it was almost midnight. He hugged his father at the door of the house and promised to return on Sunday for lunch. Father, the watch. What about it? Should I keep it? That's for you to decide, but if you keep it for the right reason. What reason is that? To remember where you came from and where you can go, not to impress anyone. On the way back to the mansion, Richard drove slowly, observing the city streets as if he were seeing them for the first time. He passed through the Elmwood neighborhood where he grew up, the school where he studied, the market where his father had sold the watch. He arrived home and found Helen waiting in the living room. How was the event, Mr. Maxwell? I destroyed my reputation and found my character. Helen smiled. Good deal. Helen, may I ask something? If you were me, what would you do now? Sleep. Tomorrow is another day, and you'll need energy to rebuild. Rebuild what? Everything, but now the right way. Richard went up to his room, put the watch in the nightstand drawer, not in a safe deposit box, not in a display case, just in an ordinary drawer, and lay down. For the first time in weeks, he slept soundly, and he dreamed of his father's hand teaching him to ride a bicycle in the backyard of the old house. 3 months passed since the night of the event. The construction company's office, which once buzzed with meetings and negotiations, now had a different rhythm, calmer, more human. Michael had left the partnership a week after the event, taking with him some clients and 2 employees. He said he couldn't work with someone who destroyed his own image out of moral whim. Richard didn't try to dissuade him, but not everything was a loss. Richard's real story, widely reported by the press, had attracted a different kind of client. Small business owners who identified with his humble origins, charity organizations that wanted genuine partnerships, not just social marketing. Investors who valued transparency more than rhetoric. The charity fund not only got off the ground, but became the company's most successful project. In 3 months, it had already benefited 50 needy families and created 2 vocational workshops. But the biggest change wasn't in business, it was at home. The mansion, little by little, was being transformed. The grand ballroom, where only corporate events used to take place, now functioned as a craft school 3 times a week. Young people from the Elmwood neighborhood where Richard grew up came to learn carpentry, electrical work, plumbing, and Joel coordinated everything. One Thursday afternoon, Richard arrived home and found his father in the makeshift workshop, teaching a group of teenagers how to repair antique watches. How do you distinguish a sound that needs adjustment from one that needs patience? Joel asked the class. A boy of about 15 raised his hand. Is it by the rhythm, Mr. Joel? The one that needs adjustment makes an irregular noise? Very good, Raphael. And the one that needs patience? It makes a continuous but soft sound, as if it's asking for time. Joel smiled and noticed Richard at the door. All right, everyone, let's stop for today. Remember, next week, everyone brings a broken watch from home. We'll see who learned to listen. The young people said goodbye and left in a group, chatting animatedly about gears and springs. How was your day? Joel asked, putting away the tools. Good. We closed the contract to build a community center in the Flower Gardens estate. The neighborhood where you grew up? The very same. Joel stopped putting away the tools and looked at his son. And how do you feel about that? Good. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm building something that matters. They walked together towards the house. In the garden, Helen was watering the plants while talking to a woman Richard didn't know. Who is she? Mrs. Mary, Raphael's mother, the boy with the intelligent question. She cleans offices at night and studies nursing in the morning. She came to thank you for the classes her son is taking. Richard approached the two women. Good afternoon, Mrs. Mary. Good afternoon, Mr. Maxwell. The woman made to extend her hand, but then hesitated, looking at her own calloused hands. Richard extended his hand first and greeted her warmly. How is Raphael doing in classes? Very well, sir. He comes home talking about gears, hands, things I don't even understand. But I see his eyes shining, you know. It's been a while since I've seen that. And you? How are your nursing studies going? Mrs. Mary smiled, but there was weariness in her eyes. They're going well. It's tough, working at night and studying in the morning, but I want to give Raphael a better future. I don't want him to go through the life I did. Richard looked at the woman, a feminine version of what his own mother had been, and felt something stir in his chest. Mrs. Mary, may I ask a question? Would you like a day job? What do you mean? We need someone to help coordinate the workshop activities, organize schedules, control materials, monitor student development. It's a job that would allow you to study and still be nearby when Raphael is in class. Mrs. Mary's eyes filled with tears. Are you serious, sir? Completely. If you're interested, we can discuss salary and hours tomorrow. Mrs. Mary squeezed Richard's hand tightly. Thank you. Thank you very much. After she left, Joel and Richard sat on the mansion's porch. That was a good thing you did. I learned from the best teacher. Joel smiled. By the way, I got a call today from Mr. Edward, the teacher. The very same. He said he saw the article about the workshop in the newspaper and was proud. He wants to come and see the project. When? Next Saturday. I hope you'll be here. Wouldn't miss it for anything. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the sun set behind the garden trees. Father, may I ask something I've always wanted to know? Always. When I was a child, you sometimes stayed up all night. I would hear your footsteps around the house. What were you afraid of? Joel took a long time to answer, afraid of not being able to give you what you deserved. And now? Now I know I did. How can you be sure? Because you have become a person who cares more about giving than receiving, and that is worth more than any inheritance I could leave. That night, Richard had dinner at the old house with his father, as had become a Thursday custom. After dinner, Joel showed him a letter that had arrived that morning. It's from Mark. The street vendor? He writes letters? He does, and very well. Richard read the letter aloud. Mr. Joel, I hope you are well. I wanted to thank you for choosing me to keep your son's watch. It was an honor to be part of this story. I used The 2 coins you gave me to buy school supplies for my grandson. He's learning to read and always asks me about the rich man who discovered he wasn't rich, but was better off that way. Best regards, Mark." Richard folded the letter and returned it to his father. "He's right, you know." "About what?" "I discovered I wasn't rich, but I was better off that way." "Duh, how so?" "Before, I had money, but no peace. I had success, but no meaning. I had a story, but it was a lie." Richard looked out the kitchen window. "Now I have less money, but more purpose. Fewer certainties, but more truth." "And the watch? Is it still in the drawer?" "No. I brought it here." Richard took the watch from his pocket and placed it on the table. "I thought it should be in the house where our story began." Joel picked up the object carefully. "Do you want me to keep it?" "I want it to be where it can do the most good, where it can remind more people that the time we receive is less important than the time we give back." Joel opened the watch. The hands marked 10:30, the time Richard had chosen to remember the moment his father saved him without him knowing. "Do you know what I'm going to do with it?" "What?" "I'm going to leave it in the workshop so the boys can see that sometimes the most valuable things are the ones that carry the most scratches." "What if someone steals it?" "Then it's because they need it more than we do." They laughed together, and Richard realized he couldn't remember the last time he had laughed with his father. A week later, on a Saturday morning, Mr. Edward visited the workshop. At 82 years old, he walked slowly, but his eyes remained bright with curiosity. Joel greeted him at the door and took him to see the project. Edward observed the young people working, asked questions about the techniques they were learning, praised the organization of the space. When he saw the watch displayed in a small display case in the center of the workshop, he stopped. "Is this the same one?" "The same," Joel confirmed. Edward approached the display case and read the plaque Richard had commissioned. This watch was a gift of charity that became a symbol of hope. "May it remind us that the most important time is the time we dedicate to each other." "May I touch it?" Joel opened the display case and handed the watch to Edward. The old teacher held it with reverence, like someone finding a long-lost child. "Does it work?" "Perfectly." Edward opened the cover and observed the hands marking 10:30. "What time is that?" Richard, who was observing the scene, approached. "The time we learned that love makes no noise." Edward smiled and returned the watch to Joel. "You made better use of it than I ever imagined." "How so?" "When I gave this watch to your mother, I thought I was just helping a family in need. I never imagined I was planting a seed that would grow so much." Edward looked around the workshop, seeing the young people concentrated on their tasks. "How many boys have passed through here?" 43 so far, Joel replied. "And 15 have already found permanent jobs. And all this started with a watch." "No," Richard corrected. "All this started with the kindness of a teacher who cared about a family he barely knew." Tears welled in Edward's eyes. "Do you know what's most beautiful about all this?" "What?" "It's that now you are the teachers. You are passing on what you received." That afternoon, after Edward left, Richard and Joel sat in the mansion's garden. Helen served coffee and homemade biscuits, then discreetly withdrew. "Father, I have a proposal." "What is it?" "How about we transform the entire mansion into a school?" "What do you mean?" Sell the house and use the money to build a real vocational school. With bigger workshops, more equipment, dormitories for students from other cities." Joel looked at his son with surprise. "You would sell the mansion?" "In a second. I never felt at home here. This was just where I lived. Home is where you feel good about yourself." "And where do you feel good about yourself?" "In the workshop, in the old house, in the places where I can be who I truly am." Joel smiled. "And I thought I had raised a businessman." "You did. But you raised a businessman who learned the difference between building walls and building bridges. 2 months later, the mansion was being transformed into a vocational school. Richard moved back to the old house where he grew up. He slept in the same childhood room, ate at the same formica table, sat on the same porch where his father waited for him with stories. The difference was that now he understood the value of each of these things. One January evening, father and son were on the porch watching the summer rain. The watch was on the table between them, always marking 10:30. "Father, may I ask one last question?" "Not the last, but you can ask one more. If you had to start all over again, would you change anything?" Joel thought for a long moment. "I would change the time it took me to tell you the truth. And me, what would you change?" "The time it took me to ask." They laughed and listened to the sound of the rain on the neighborhood rooftops. "Do you know what I learned?" Richard said, "What?" "That time is not in watches. It's in the moments we choose to live truthfully. And this is one of those moments." "This is one of those moments." Joel picked up the watch and put it in his pocket. "I'm taking it to the school tomorrow. The new class of boys will arrive, and I want them to see that sometimes the most beautiful stories begin with simple gestures." "And what story will you tell?" "The true one. The story of a teacher who gave a watch to a pregnant woman in need, of a father who secretly rescued his son's hope, and of a son who learned that the most important time is the time we share with those we love." The next morning, when Richard woke up, he found a note from his father on the kitchen table. "Went to school early. Coffee is ready. The watch is in the right place. So are you. Love, Dad." Richard smiled, poured coffee, and prepared for another day of work. But before leaving, he looked out the window and saw Mr. Edward walking slowly down the street, carrying an old leather satchel. He ran to the door. "Professor, what a surprise!" "Good morning, Richard. I hope you don't mind, but I asked your father if I could help at the school. I said I still have a lot to teach." "And what did he say?" "That there's a class waiting to learn basic math." Richard opened the door completely. "Then you better not keep the students waiting." They walked together down the street. Richard had known since childhood, towards the school that was being built on the rubble of a lie and the foundations of a truth. In Mr. Edward's pocket, an antique watch marked the right time, the moment when everything begins anew.